for once, I know the exact date, and there's a reason for that, because it's my old birthday. There's one birthday where you're old as dirt. After that, it doesn't matter. So today's that day for me.
You must be 39.
Yeah! June 15th, 2016, and we are in the Clinton County Historical Museum. The association gal who runs the show and hasn't cracked the whip since anyway, Melissa Peck, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for being here, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Who did you bring with us today?
We have Sue Howell Hamlin here with us today to talk about her new book, Welcome to the Witherill. She's all the way from Elmira.
You know, Sue, some of us have a vested interest in the things we write about and talk about. You have a vested interest that goes back to diaper days, don't you?
You got it. That's very true.
So how did you end up in Elmira?
Elmira College.
Well, there you go. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. That's
So
how
you were born and brought up in Plattsburgh.
in the hotel. Lived there at the hotel, except for the 4 years when Daddy was in the service during World War II. Came back to Plattsburgh in October of 45 and was there until I left for college in September of 55. So.
Really, that was a good year for me. I graduated from high school in 1955. How about
You
that?
too, huh?
Yeah, look, there's the ring right there.
Ah,
Doesn't fit any other finger anymore. Never mind.
I won't say anything.
We told some of the good anecdotes long before the camera was on today, but we'll try to remember some of the good
can come up with
stuff
some other
later
ones.
on. But I can remember a few days at the Fife and Drum. Calvin was pretty young in those days, so
Okay.
he never
He never went there.
went there. He had one question when I walked up the stairs. You know what it was?
No, what?
Where the heck did they park all the cars for the people that
I've
stayed
had
overnight?
several people that have asked that. Along Division Street, in back of the building that was Fitzpatrick and Howell,
Oh,
an
yes,
appliance store,
yes.
there were a lot of parking places there. And then my dad bought the Burdon house that faced Oak Street and tore that house down and put a parking lot back
See, I
there.
never knew that. I
Yeah.
never knew that there had been a house there.
Yes.
Because I came here in '61,
Okay.
and a lot of things had already been done by then, and 6 or 7 years later, it was all done.
Yes, it was.
Isn't that amazing?
1968, they closed the hotel.
We are so delighted that you came down here to see
Well,
us
I'm
today.
pleased to be here. It's always fun to come back to Plattsburgh.
Melissa, you got to run. It's some kind of a board meeting. You're always doing official things. But you got something going on behind me, and if I get my fat backside out of the way, Calvin can get a picture of it. Tell me about it.
Sure, right in line with the release of Sue's book last fall, we pulled some things from the collection here, menus, some different advertising ephemera, to go along with the release of the book. This is Sue's second time speaking in Plattsburgh on behalf of the book, and we're very excited to have her back again and to have had the opportunity to interview with you folks, but this will be on display here, so if anybody's interested in purchasing the book during their visit, they're welcome to come right upstairs and take a look at the fine things we have on display from the Witherill Hotel.
I love it. Memories for all of us, right, Sue?
Oh, yes, for sure.
We're going to get into it.
All right.
And you won't be here.
I know.
But I always appreciate you inviting us here. I feel like I'm home when I walk in the front door.
Well,
And that's, I blow a lot of smoke. But this time I'm not blowing smoke because these people are among my dearest, closest friends in the world. People that love history are my friends.
well, it's a pleasure to have you here again, and hopefully we'll be welcoming you back for another new exhibit or some exciting announcement.
Lord willing, and that creek doesn't rise, we'll be here. Melissa, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Susan, you and I will get a chance to sit down and just chat a little bit
Okay.
for a while. Does
Very
that sound
good.
good? Thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
Calvin wasn't sure that I was familiar with the fife and drum this morning, so he helped me last night by finding some old newspaper articles that chronicled the history of this wonderful place called the Witherill. One of the benefits of growing old as I am is to have grown up during the hotel age. And when I first got my job in radio in Plattsburgh in 1961,
Okay.
I took a Greyhound bus that cost $18.73 round trip. So I spent the night before my trip, because I had been summoned here by the owner of a radio station right there on Court Street, and found the money underneath the pillows in the couch, and enough money to get here. And guess where the bus station was in those days?
I can't imagine.
Cumberland.
Was it? Oh, that's right, it was. It was.
So that's where I drank
That's-
coffee and read the Press Republican until the radio station opened, and auditioned and got the job. And
And here you are.
well, that's another place I got fired or kicked out of. But I found a home. So let's go back to the very beginning. I don't need to ask you, why would you write a book about the Witherill? I mean, the Witherill, it's Sue/Witherill. I mean, that's the way it is.
No, not really, but,
Well, your whole life has been in tune with it since an early childhood.
oh, yeah, for sure. I got the idea, well, go back a little bit. My mother broke up housekeeping in 2000 and moved in with my sister in Northern Virginia. And when my mother and my sister and I were going through the house to decide what to take and what to get rid of and so on, I was going through my father's office, and there were tons of pictures and newspaper clippings, letters and so on. And I said to Mom, "What do you want me to do with this stuff?" "Throw it out," she said. And I said,
come on, your mother didn't say that.
Yeah, she did. And I said, "I can't do that." Well, then she said, "You haul it back to Elmira and keep it," because I don't want it. So I said, okay. So later that year, there were some neat pictures, 8 by 10 black and white glossies that my dad had taken of the hotel, different rooms and so on. And I decided to scan some of them and put them in sheet protectors in 3-ring binders, and I gave one to each of my children, my cousin Sheila, and my sister for Christmas. And they all said they were the best Christmas presents ever.
The best. How could it not be the best?
They just loved it. And I had labeled them all and so on. So that sat there. But it wasn't until I was talking with Don Benjamin, of the Royal Savage.
Of course, yes, we do.
And Don's an old friend, and I keep in touch with him via email or a phone call a couple times a year. And he was talking with me about his daughter Kate's book about cats. And she and her co-author were going to be on the Today Show the following week. And he wanted me to be sure and watch. And he said, "And by the way, Barbara and I have written a book about the Royal Savage." I said, "Where can I get one?" And he said, "The Clinton County Historical Association is handling them." So I said, "That's great." And we chatted a little bit more, and he said, "Say, why don't you write a book about the Witherill?" He said, "You lived there."
So
And I
was
said,
Don's suggestion.
It really was.
Oh, wonderful.
So I said, that's not a bad idea. So a couple weeks later, I had called Melissa and asked her if she would be interested in carrying the book and getting the proceeds from the sale. And she said she would. And I said, "Could I come up there and do some research on any Witherill stuff you might have?" And she said, "By all means." I also talked with Deb Kimmuck at the Feinberg Library and Special Collections, and she welcomed me up there as well. So I made arrangements, drove up, and spent a couple of days researching stuff, and they were all kind enough to scan things for me, and I put them on a disc and headed back from Elmira and got started. Took about a year.
Did it take about a year?
Yeah.
People have no idea how long it takes.
Well, I
To
could have
put something
taken
like
longer
this.
but this took about a year. And a lot of the stuff I had already scanned.
So
I had
you hadn't
everything
been
on
in
disc.
town here for a long time.
No, but back and forth every year or so.
Yeah, but I mean, you
Not living here, no.
So what year did you last live here?
55.
It was 55.
Yeah.
That's that's when I left home at 55.
Yeah.
When you got of age back in those days.
Yeah.
Unlike today, where many parents coddle their kids till they're 35
Or 40.
and 40 and more. When you were 18, you were gone. Your parents couldn't afford to keep you anymore.
Yeah.
There was no spendable
And
income.
you
in
needed
my
to
family.
further your education to decide what career you were going to have.
Yeah. And so you did what at that time?
Well, I got married and had 3 daughters, and got involved in a lot of different volunteer work in Elmira, New York, where I settled, and raised dogs and showed them, and became an AKC dog show judge.
No, I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and wrote a book about dogs back in 1973, I think it was.
No kidding.
About African hounds, which is the breed I
Yeah,
showed.
beautiful
raised.
animals.
And so that went over. I like to write, but I have got to get motivated. Something that really interests me. I wrote a column in the newspaper about dogs down there, the Elmira Star Gazette, for a number of years. I did a little book about my mother's family, Irish, by the name of Keenan, from Brooklyn, New York. We had a family reunion of that side of the family in 1998, and I did a book about that side of the family.
So your mother's maiden name was Keenan.
Keenan.
We have a dear friend there by the name of Pete Keenan.
Really?
Oh yeah, sits next to us in church every Sunday. Good guy. Okay. Go
Well,
ahead.
she has 2 siblings she was a family of 8, and there are 2 siblings who survive.
Makes you wonder if there's any connection up here.
I don't think so. I know most of my cousins, and
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
My cousins are mostly long in the tooth, because my mother was the youngest of 7 kids.
well, my mother was the second oldest of 8.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Big
so-
families.
Yeah, big family. So,
So you just decided to stay there.
yeah.
Well, you've
I,
had a very interesting.
Well, I was a housewife, mother, and volunteer and dog raiser for a number of years, and then I got involved with the SPCA down there, and was on the board of directors.
Wonderful.
And the exec director left, and I was chairman of the shelter committee, and the board said, well, why don't you take over running the shelter till we can get a search committee together to get someone.
So how long did that last? So
6 years.
Yeah. Of course.
6 years, and did an awful lot for the society then, and then went to Cornell and was the administrative manager of the Baker Institute at Cornell, which is
No
part of the
kidding.
veterinary college.
Been there, done that. Ever
And
saw
Baker
that-
Institute was the place where the scientists invented distemper vaccine for dogs, parvovirus
Wonderful
vaccine for
place.
dogs.
I went and visited that place in 1954, thinking I might want to go to college there.
Really?
Being from a very tiny North Country town, the campus frightens me to death.
Oh, it's a huge
And I
campus,
talked to
gorgeous
the-
campus.
Talked to the scientists there
Mhm.
and was just so impressed, because I wanted to be a civil engineer in those days.
Mhm.
And so, I had a son that graduated from Cornell much, much later. When you were talking about all your work with the dogs,
Mhm.
this has nothing to do, I don't think, with the Witherill Hotel, but I don't care. I
Well,
wanna
yeah,
know.
we had some dogs there.
Oh, you
I
did?
had my series of Cocker Spaniels
Oh,
there. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but many, many years ago, when people pass away, sometimes they leave me their collections of things, much to the embarrassment of my poor, I call her long-suffering wife Kay, who says, not another bag of stuff. What's in that one? Somebody died and left me a wonderful collection of audio tapes, just great stuff from New York City in the 50s.
Mhm.
In that bag or box of tapes were hundreds of tiny little reel-to-reel tapes from a woman whose name I've forgotten for the last 40 years, who was very much involved in AKC and showing dogs and communicating like we would do in Facebook or email these days via these little tiny
Little tapes.
tapes. And so, of course, I had to listen to every single one, and the lingo mostly were things that were completely foreign to me.
Mhm.
But I found it interesting. That was a whole different era of communication.
Well, and a whole different,
Yeah.
bunch of
But how,
people.
they were
and-
talking about where the next meetings would be and where the
Next
conferences
shows were
would
gonna be, and-
where
yeah.
the shows would be, and it was most fascinating.
Probably talking about this dog and that bitch.
Yeah, a lot going on between
Yeah.
here and California. though.
Yeah. Yep.
So you had a good time. You've had a good life.
I have.
In
Very
Elmira.
good life.
So connected with Cornell. I
Well, I
mean,
retired from there.
are there more beautiful campuses out
I
there?
don't think so.
Not too
But when
many.
you're working, you don't get a chance to stroll around that much.
Yeah.
So, but
Every once in a while-
I enjoyed it. It was a good number of years, and met some fascinating people, and I worked with a bunch of really nice people.
So you didn't know much other life except living in a hotel from the
No,
time you
when
were
I-
a little tiny child, and your parents lived there.
Yep.
Now define precisely where the Witherill was located. I mean, I know a little bit about all the hotels in the
Okay.
history in town, going way
Okay.
back.
The Witherill was located on 25 Margaret Street, at 25 Margaret Street, which is now the site of the Glens Falls National Bank, right across from Arnie's.
How well I know, because you talked about Arnie's and the connection, and Arnie is still going to work every day. He's a dear friend. He's going to be 90 years old.
Good for him.
And how often do you think we looked out the window at Arnie's over at the Witherill,
Yeah,
wishing that I could go over later and have a little sip as a fife and drum?
yeah. Fife and Drum was a neat place. Did you ever go there?
Oh, come on.
Did you?
I came here when I was 24 years old
Okay.
in 1961,
So you did go to the Fife and Drum.
and every other bar in town.
Well, did you have one of their $3.50 lobster dinners?
No, I don't think so.
Well, you missed something.
Maybe I did.
Of course, I didn't either. Mother was always saying, don't order the most expensive thing on the menu, because we ate off the menu. We had no kitchen in our apartment.
Now you can't get a dessert for that price.
I know it.
Yeah.
Inflation is awful.
I'm sure they have some of the menus here. Did you put some of the menus in?
Put some of the
Did
menus,
you?
quite a few menus, and some of the recipes, and that kind of thing was in there.
Well, just give me a little bit of history about the Witherill.
How far back you want me to
To
go?
the beginning.
Okay. 1868, a fellow by the name of Hiram Witherill built this hotel on the site of an earlier village inn which had burned down. And he ran it for a number of years, and there were another number of managers there. Witherill was from Chazy. His parents were farmers, and he had decided the farming life was not for him. And so he had a little tavern, and I guess a couple of rooms upstairs, and he was in the hotel business. So anyway, he came down to Plattsburgh, and he built the hotel in 1868. And as I said, it went through a few managers and so on. And my great-grandfather, William T. Howell, leased the place in 1884 and then purchased it in 1886. Now, he was born in Baltimore, and he worked in Washington. And I have just, through some papers and part of that stuff that I haul back to Elmira, and this is post-book, I'm just finding stuff about his career working at the Treasury Department after he worked as keeper of the Senate restaurant for several years in the Capitol.
Wow.
And he, after the Senate restaurant, he went to work as a customs officer and for the Treasury Department, and came up to the North Country and was patrolling the borders for smugglers of, get this, pearls, boar bristles, woolens, furs, and horses
Boar bristles, don't you love it?
for hairbrushes.
Of course. I love it.
So anyway, that's what he did. And he must have been in government service. I haven't quite figured it out, but close to 20 years. Because he was still working for the Treasury Department, you know, and owning the hotel. And he had a manager, I believe, by the name of McBride. No relation to the McBride auto places here. I did check that out. But anyway, he was scheduled, and this is some of the paperwork that I found. Did you ever hear of the Chinese Exclusion Act? Back in
Yes.
okay, it was to prevent Chinese men from coming over and working.
Yeah. We've talked about it. A friend of ours wrote a book about it.
Okay.
So we interviewed him.
All right, this I think was passed in maybe the late 1870s, something like that. I'm not sure of the date. And the government apparently had planned for my great-grandfather to go to San Francisco to help enforce this act. And to that end, I have discovered the travel plans that they made for him. He was to go down south to Panama, this is before the Panama Canal, overland, and get on a boat and go up to San Francisco. But he'd already bought the hotel and didn't really like the idea of being removed to San Francisco, so quit government service at that point. So this had to be in the late 1880s, 1889, 1890, and decided he was going to retire from government service and stayed here. So this I have found out. The other thing I'm working on right now, we never knew, he was called Major Howell, and we never knew if that was from service in the Civil War or what. But I am finding some stuff in that box of papers that he in fact did serve, but never got into the service until 1863 when he was 20. But come out a major, he must have had some friends somewhere.
Well, those were tough times, and a lot of those guys made rank very quickly.
Yeah. So I've got some people trying to do some genealogy stuff for me.
These people here are experts. Many of my friends who are on this organization, this association, would be delighted to get into that for you.
You think?
If you need help on this end. Oh,
Okay.
yes.
I have a couple friends at home that are working on it for me too.
Genealogists are the neatest people.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
are. So and to find out some of this stuff, because my grandfather had always wanted to learn more about his father's family. His father died when Grandpa was 19, and Grandpa had to take over the operation of the hotel at age 19. Now, when you're 19, you don't get into conversation with your parents about your forebears because you could care less.
Yeah.
You want to know later, but when Grandpa tried, I think I found out more about Grandpa's family than he ever knew. By doing this.
This is true now, and checking out my own dad's family. When we were kids, you never even talked about it. They grew up in hard times, and we were.
Yeah,
he wasn't interested in his ancestry, and I wasn't until I was
older. Yeah.
Much
Yeah.
older. But then you hear fascinating stories.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, great grandpa, when he was at the Senate restaurant, introduced Senate bean soup on the menu.
Come on.
And it is still on the menu this day.
Come on.
It is required. But
Senate
back
bean soup.
in and the recipe's in there. Back in 1907, there were a couple of senators from out west, Midwest, that wanted Senate bean soup on the menu, and they put it on. But great grandpa's putting it on the menu preceded them by about 30 some years. So, and I've talked to the people down at the Capitol, and yeah, they've confirmed it.
Isn't that wonderful?
Isn't that fun?
Is there any other family that has been in the hotel business or was in the hotel business consistently for that length of time? Do you know?
Oh, there probably was. I don't know of anybody right now, because
certainly
everything
don't
is
know.
a franchise or a chain.
Well, there was a franchise involved in the Witherill at one point, wasn't there?
No.
I thought there was some franchise that wanted to come in and buy
Oh,
buy the
no.
Witherill before it was sold.
Treadway.
Treadway, yes.
But there wasn't a franchise per se. My dad kind of joined forces with Frank Birdsell, who was president of Treadway, and they were good friends through the New York State Hotel Association. And they went into a sort of a little, it wasn't really a franchise, but they went into a sort of a little agreement for purchasing power and that kind of thing, so that my father could use the Treadways,
But
entree.
a lot of ideas that they had in those days just couldn't pan out because it was the end of the era coming.
It
up.
was. And
There was handwriting on the wall.
well, the Northway, of course, was and I hate to say that because Jimmy Fitzpatrick was the one that introduced the Northway bill in 1952, and he was my aunt's husband's brother. So I mean, it was Uncle Jimmy and so on, and he was the one that had introduced the Northway. But
But it didn't happen just in Plattsburgh. It was Eisenhower's introduction of the interstate, highway system back in the early 50s, which was for an entirely different purpose. And that was to move personnel and equipment and so on in case of war. So this interstate highway system, that's how that got going, what you know about that. So when the Northway was finally completed, I think it was in 65, going up to Montreal, this, and Holiday Inns and Howard Johnson's and other places sprung up at the exits, and restaurants close by, and travelers didn't have to come through the center of a town to find a place to stay overnight. And this has happened all over the country, not just here.
There are a few nice hotels in our country that have been restored and are still thriving because they're so historical.
Mm-hmm.
The big hotels in Plattsburgh, starting about that time period, never had a chance.
No.
Growing up, did you hear your dad and others talking about the competition with the other hotels like the Union and the Cumberland and...
Well, the Cumberland, I think there was more competition there than certainly the Union, which was pretty much a bar, and I don't think they had really much of a restaurant. But not really. They sort of each did their own thing.
They really did.
Yeah, I mean,
But the Witherill had the stories. I don't know.
yeah, they did have a lot of
It's
stories.
not just because you collected them, but I heard Witherill stories when I first came here in
Well,
1961.
there had been a lot of well-known and famous people that had stayed there, presidents, high military people, generals and admirals, senators, all kinds of people stayed there. And as a little kid growing up, we got introduced to a bunch of them. For example, Uncle Jim Fitzpatrick had Governor Dewey here in the late 40s.
Thomas was here.
He was here. He was at the Witherill for lunch. I was coming down the stairs, having been up in our apartment. I'd had lunch in the Fife and Drum, gone upstairs to brush my teeth or something, and come back downstairs and headed back for school, and Uncle Jim's in the lobby with all these men. There's a picture in the book. And Sue, he says, come on over here, want you to meet someone. So
Cool.
I go down the stairs, I go over to Uncle Jim. He said, now, Sue, he said, this is Governor Dewey. And we said, how do you do, and all that, shook hands, and this is, Uncle Jim said, this is my niece, Sue. Wasn't really my niece, but, close enough for government work.
Close enough for
Yeah.
government work.
She's the granddaughter of the owner. So that was that, and I went back to school, Wasn't terribly impressed at the time. Then another time, I think Doug Hammarskjöld was here. He was the Secretary General of the
I did
UN.
not know he had been here.
Yeah, he was here for a luncheon, and I got introduced to him in the same fashion. So, and there were a bunch of people that I met. I remember, and this was funny, you remember the singer Charlie Applewhite?
Of course.
Well, he was at the hotel, and my sister, of course, was a preteen. I was a teen. He was putting on some sort of a concert, or there was a dance and a concert at the airbase, and he was staying at the hotel. So I was a teenager and went to the dance, but the next morning he was eating breakfast in the dining room. So I go and plop myself down in the chair across from him and introduced myself, and we chatted. And of course, he was from Texas and had quite a drawl. But the fun story is that my sister decided that she was going to go and see Charlie Apple. She really drooled over him. And she's younger than I. And she was kind of a preteen, I think, at that point. And she went and plopped herself down in the other chair at dinner time when he was there, before he went off to do whatever he had to do. And she said, is there anything I can do for you? And he said, I'd love a chocolate ice cream cone. So Bonnie runs down to Meyer's drugstore and buys him one. It was all melted by the time she got back.
Isn't that beautiful?
But of course, we had ice cream right out in the kitchen.
But what a great story.
But isn't that silly?
I know a story that you don't know about
Uh-oh.
a famous person that was at the Witherill Hotel.
What's that?
Because it was a very well-kept secret for many, many years. And it involved a friend of mine who was almost 90 years old at the time, who had been a very good singer and piano player in her day. And I encouraged her to play until the day she died. But I asked about her childhood, and there were ghost stories involved, and that's why I was so interested for my books. But she told me she was playing at a bar that was the predecessor of Mickey's Restaurant on Riley Avenue in Plattsburgh, called the White Owl. That was what the original bar was called. And she was an older teenager, playing a piano for all the drunks on a Sunday afternoon.
Uh-huh.
And she was singing In the Mood. And suddenly she heard a very soft male voice over her shoulder saying, "Ma'am, I like the way you play that song. Would you mind if I sat down and played with you?" She turned around, and it was a very handsome young black man. And she had never seen a black man in her life before. So she was a little bit afraid, and she said yes. And so he sat down on a stool, and they played and sang In the Mood. And the guys loved it. And the young man said to her, "Now, you see over there those two boys standing in the doorway? Those are my boys. We're on the road. We like the way you sing. We need a girl singer. Would you mind going on the road? We got to go to Montreal this weekend." And she said, "No, I don't think my mother would let me." And he said, "Well, listen, here's my card. I'm staying at the Witherill Hotel for a couple days while we're in town. Here's my room number, my phone number over there. Give us a ring if you change your mind." Gave her the card and walked away. And on the card was his signature, King Cole.
Oh, Nat King Cole.
Nat King Cole and his trio. Before he became much of a singer, they were on the road, and
Oh,
he
for
was a
heaven's
piano
sake.
player.
And stayed at the hotel.
And stayed at the Witherill.
I'll be darned.
And I guess my destiny was to meet you, Sue, and to tell you that story.
That story.
Because I've told it to many others, and they yawn a lot.
Well, do you remember Al Delano? He's still living, you know.
I know Al Delano, one of the finest jazz piano players, who could have been world famous and
he could
chose
have been.
chose
He's
to play golf instead.
Or play pool.
And play pool too, yeah.
Yeah.
Such a good guy.
Oh, he is. He's still living, and he lives in Jacksonville, Florida. And my sister attended a wedding down there, I think a year and a half ago, and went to see him.
I haven't seen.
He was playing piano.
Of course.
He's still playing piano.
Well,
And he's,
you know,
he's
he
got to be
played-
in his 90s, doesn't
He
he?
played at Anthony's for a long time, and
Yeah.
he and another dear friend of mine, Jack Mayhew, a world famous clarinetist, who graduated from Plattsburgh High School in 1958. No, 1948, excuse me. Were on the road together. And both of these guys, you know, in my opinion, they were as good
As anybody.
as anybody.
Yeah,
They
they were.
chose to play golf and play pool and
Have a
play
good time.
summers at Anthony's
Yeah.
and have a good time, and I'm so glad to hear that connection.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So a lot of stories
Oh, yeah.
from the Witherill, and it's so rare to find somebody like you, Sue, who was literally immersed in the hotel atmosphere because that was your home.
It was,
People
and I hated it.
Did you really growing up?
Growing up, I wanted to be in a house like everybody else.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, we had no kitchen. It was just two bedrooms and a very small living room, and even though we essentially had run of the hotel, it was mind your manners. We have guests. You know, you can't be loud. You can't be this. You can't be that.
It was a different world, wasn't it?
Oh
Sue?
yeah, and you know, a child needs to get into mischief, I think, and I did.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. we said before the camera began that my mother's first words to the doctor when I was born on this date in 1937 were, "Put him back, put him back." But she always called me Peck's bad boy. And if a family had to have a black sheep, I was the black sheep.
You were it.
But I've always believed that kids have to.
Well, have to explore and have to, you know, one of the little shenanigans, that really isn't anything really, but my mother made a big deal out of it, was one day I wanted to go up on the roof and see what was up there on the hotel roof. And so I did.
No kidding.
And took the back stairway up, and there was a door that went out onto the roof, and it was, flat roof, and I looked around, and oh my gosh, Gordy, I could see the lake. I looked to the east and over to the west. I could see the college, and I could see Champlain, or well, not Champlain, Physicians Hospital, as it was then, and all the houses and the trees, and it was just beautiful. So I had to go downstairs and tell my mother that I had been on the roof of the hotel. Boy, did I get it.
You had to tell her.
I had to tell her. I don't know why. I should have learned from earlier escapades, but I didn't. And I told her that I'd been on the roof, and she said, "You could have been killed. You could have fallen off." And I said, "Well, I didn't go anywhere near the edge." Well, anyway, she must have told my dad, because they both came after me later and said, "Don't you ever go up on the roof again." But the funny part of this was my mom passed away 6 years ago at the age of 97, and she was lucid up until the end.
Wonderful.
And she said to me, we were reminiscing one day before she passed away, and she said, "Sue, you've got to tell me, why in God's name did you go up on the roof?" And I said, "Just to see what was up there." She said, "In all the years I lived at the hotel, I was never on the roof." And I said, "You should have gone."
Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful?
So anyway, but we wanted to see what was where and where things were kept and so on and so forth.
Did you enjoy the music at the Fife and Drum?
Oh,
when they
yeah.
had that, when they
Yeah.
had-
Well,
Yeah.
every time I'd walk in there and Al was there, he'd start playing "If You Knew Susie,"
Oh,
like I know.
God, of course. Isn't that great?
Yeah. Yeah. And he even did that when he was playing down at the Valcourt Lodge.
Of course.
We came up one summer and walked in, and he knew me immediately. And
Another place that doesn't exist
I
anymore.
know, that
and
was
the-
fun too.
The Lieberthals, wonderful people.
yeah,
You know, when you're, one of the benefits of living a long time as I have is these memories.
yeah.
And if
Some
you
you'd
are-
like to delete if you had a delete
Oh,
button, but others you want to keep.
Yeah, I know. But the hotel memories and of course the bars, it's something that young people don't quite understand the way you and I might.
Yeah,
Because there were bars on every street corner.
Yep.
Every little community had one or two or three bars.
yeah,
And it was possible to stop, and have a little short beer on the way home from work at the radio station for me in those days. But with the way things changed over the years,
yeah.
DWI laws.
Well, another story you might enjoy, my great-uncle Hammond, who was my grandfather's younger brother, John Hammond Howell, he was, I think, 9 or 10 years old when their father passed away, and of course Grandpa took over the hotel, and Uncle Hammond was just a child at that point. So when he grew up, he left to go down to New York City and work, married, and so forth. And but he apparently hung out with the Broadway theater crowd a fair amount. And he and John Barrymore were very good friends.
Wow.
So when Barrymore was in Lake Placid filming something, he would come down to the Witherill, and he would go to the front desk, and he'd say, "I'd like to see Jack Howell." He called him Jack, and Uncle Hammond called Barrymore Jack. And so the desk clerk
You're gonna
said,
drop names, you might as well jack
Sure.
each other, right?
"Yeah."
I love it.
So anyway, he said, "I'd like to see Jack Howell," and so, well, he's upstairs, and because he was living in the hotel, and so the desk clerk would call him and come down, and the two of them would give other back slaps and hugs, and off they'd go to the monopole.
Oh, can you believe it?
Off they go to the
Can you
monopole.
believe it?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So, a lot of stories like that. A lot of stories like that.
So it was every day. Did your friends think it was kind of cool that you, Sue, that you lived in a hotel?
I think they thought it was very cool. I think they thought I was a princess who was waited on hand and foot and never had to do anything. Not true. But they, when I'd invite them to come over for a sleepover or something like that, I have a friend. As a matter of fact, we're still very good friends since third grade, since we came back from Texas. And she thought it was very cool if I ordered room service and we'd get 2 Cokes, and the bellhop would come up with a tray, 2 Cokes, 2 glasses with ice.
What a picture. I can see this.
Isn't that fun?
Oh, that's just great.
We were talking about that the other day.
Oh, gosh, yes.
She lives down in Schenectady. I stopped to visit her on the way up. So we were talking about room service, and of course, my parents didn't like the idea of my ordering room service. So I just did it on special occasions.
So it was different.
Well, it was different, all right.
And you hated every minute of it.
I did. I've never had a bicycle. I was not allowed to have a bicycle.
Come on.
They said, oh, Margaret Street's too busy. You might get hit by a car. You can't have a bicycle. But I did buy one a few years
That was
ago.
privilege of a different kind.
Yeah.
You didn't even have a...
Yeah, but I got a pony one summer.
Oh, you did? Well, you got a joke.
Made up for it. So the other thing is that about the hotel, and of course the room rates certainly aren't what they are today by any chance, but or by any stretch of the imagination. We rented a camp after World War II at the summer school for 2 summers, and then down Dot Parkhurst Camp down Old Dak Road, right around the corner from the Royal Savage, for 3 summers. Let's see, 46, 47, 44, 9, yeah, for 3 summers, and then my mom and dad built their house just, across the road there, across the road from the camp that we'd rented. And mainly, I think it was for 2 reasons: to get us kids out of the hotel in the summer, but also it was cheaper to rent a camp back in those days than it was to lose the money from the rental of the rooms, which, we had to pack everything up and move out. When school was out, we were down camp for July and August and move everything back in September when school started.
Isn't that...
Pain in the neck.
Well, of course, as a kid, that wasn't a pain. You didn't have to do anything.
Well, I did. We had to lug stuff
Oh, you
back and
did?
forth. Yeah. But putting stuff away, and obviously we certainly didn't take any winter coats and stuff down to camp. But it was kind of a pain in the neck.
Something we haven't talked about, but because I'm so interested in your personal life with the Witherill, is that the Witherill changed in its scope and size at different times.
It did.
From its very beginning.
It did. When my great-grandfather, bought the hotel, there were 18 guest rooms and 1 tin bathtub.
Come on, is that in the
Seriously.
book?
And the bellhop would have to bring buckets of hot water up if someone wanted to take a bath. I don't think people bathed that much back in the day. I really don't.
You're saying that in jest, but it's absolutely true.
It is true.
We won't get into that chapter and verse, but people didn't have the same ideas of cleanliness.
That's right, back then. But anyway, there were a number of additions that were put on the hotel. In the back, I think would be the west. There were 2 different wings that were put on. One around 1910, 1911. And then another wing was put on probably before the turn of the century. And then in 1928, 29, the 3rd floor was put on by Fitzpatrick Construction
That's right, too. I knew
for
that.
the $21,000.
Yeah, think about it.
Yeah.
Think about the renovations that were done in the Witherill
Oh, yeah.
later on for $40,000 when you can barely get your bathroom done and maybe an addition on your garage for 40 grand these days.
I know it. But that was done then, and that, except for the fife and drum, which happened in 1940, was really the last, 52 they enclosed the terrace lounge, which had been that open, rounded porch. But the last big, huge, addition was the top floor. My grandparents had raised my father and my aunt in an apartment in the Levy block across the street on Margaret Street.
Really? I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Okay.
And so the apartment on the 3rd floor that became my grandparents, with the addition of the 3rd floor by Fitzpatrick's, my father and my aunt never really lived there except when they were home on vacations from school. I mean, they each were allotted their own bedrooms in that apartment, but they never really lived there because my dad was in school, my aunt was in school.
When you were a young kid there, did you ever work for pay
No.
at the Witherill? Never?
No. As a matter of fact, I think my grandparents' dearest hope would be that I would go to the hotel school at Cornell.
No
And-
kidding. Which is world famous.
Oh, yeah.
Still.
And I wasn't really interested in the hotel business because I figured I'd had enough of it. Furthermore, whenever we were out in the kitchen, they were preparing for parties and so on, and I wanted to maybe put a little piece of parsley on an hors d'oeuvre or whatever. My mother was always, get your underfoot. So, but when my sister came along, she was allowed to do that. And as a result, she ended up in the food service business for her career. She became a dietitian and ended up in the food service business. But she was allowed to help. I wasn't. So, and I never worked there. We weren't allowed to. As a matter of fact, I remember applying for a waitress job at the Royal Savage when the Keiths still own it.
You did.
I did. I applied
Wow.
for it. I got it. Another thing I told my father, I was so excited. I'd just gotten a job. I was a teenager, you know. He said, "Where?" I said, "The Royal Savage Inn." And he said, "You can't work there." I said, "Why not? They're competitors." So that was that. I didn't have that job.
Oh, you never started?
No.
Oh,
No. Wouldn't let me.
It's-
Even though they didn't serve liquor at the time.
Yeah, they didn't. There was controversy over that. Interesting, so interesting.
So, anyway.
But you know, I will begin by complimenting you again on how you put this book together.
Thank you.
It's not just a little compendium of somebody that's got 12 anecdotes and old postcard pictures. This is serious thought.
Well, thank you.
Besides, it's pretty heavy for a
Yeah, it
book
is heavy, isn't
this
it?
size. And you know why? It's great stock. And wonderful photographs of many kinds. I'm sure there are people watching our program who don't know about this book. We know about it because they love to show it to us every time we walk in the door here. We were so excited to know you were coming. But I love when it says, "Welcome to the Witherill," because they've got the big poster downstairs.
Yeah.
But you did give it serious thought. It's not something you whipped together in 3 months.
No.
You spent a long time thinking about it.
I did.
Did you write every word?
No, because there are newspaper columns in there.
Yeah, I know that, but I mean, of most of the...
But all the stuff that, well, or my sister did, and I put her writings in italics, and I did mention that in the beginning of the book. But the other thing was that the gal that did the graphics and layout for me is a good friend, and we had worked together for the African Hound Club of America, and we did there. I was editor, and she was my graphics person for our newsletter magazine. And so at least I had somebody that I'd worked with well, and we got along well, and we did this all long distance. She lived in Orlando.
No kidding.
So we did this all over the phone and email. So we had a good time.
But it shows. It's professional and
That's what she did before she retired.
Yeah.
She was a graphics person.
Because it is such a vital part of North Country history and
It is.
Plattsburgh history, I can totally understand why the Clinton County Historical Association embraced the concept and sells the book here. $29.99.
Mm-hmm. And
They're so good about selling local books here.
Yeah,
They've
they
certainly
are.
been very kind about selling all of mine here. But this is it's way more important than anything I've ever done. Here's the most ridiculous question of the day. Calvin found some there are postcards on the internet all the time from the Witherill.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you're
Yeah, I
aware of
see
that.
some too.
He found some good ones, but he saw one in the dining room.
I think
And
it's
it
in
shows
there.
all the tables. It's in
Yeah.
the book.
Yeah.
And the tables all lined up on the side. And Calvin's question to me was, how could people sit down? It looked like the tables, maybe for the photograph, had all been jammed together, but I didn't
maybe.
remember the tables being so close. He's got, what page is it, Calvin?
91.
Page 91, coming up. Of course, you remember every picture in this book.
Well, I think it was a postcard, wasn't it?
Yeah.
See how close the tables are.
Well, I think that's just the photograph.
I thought maybe that
They
was
were
all...
fairly close.
That was all set up that
No,
way.
and
But I
that
didn't
was-
remember them being that close.
Well, a person could squeeze through, a skinny person.
She smiles because she realizes there's humor in that statement.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Your seat is on page 87, Gordy.
What?
the dining room,
No, the bar,
Oh,
the stools.
yeah. Oh, you see me there.
the Fife and Drum Bar, by the way, was sold to some folks in Vermont, and it resides someplace in Vermont. And when my folks were still alive, they went over there and saw it,
No kidding.
And
You mean
I
it's
don't,
installed in another bar?
apparently, but I don't know where it is. And that would take, Vermont's a small state, but it would, it would take a lot of scouting around to find it.
Go to every bar.
Now, you hobnobbed with the rich and famous, because you've already mentioned
Well.
Jim Fitzpatrick, Governor
Well,
Dewey.
he's
and-
related.
and- Yeah, and so on. But did you know, did you remember some of the mayors? Did you remember,
Just trying to think. One mayor I remember is Jack
Tyrrell?
Tyrrell. Yeah, yeah.
we both blurted it out, and we can even call him Tarmac Jack, because it's a nickname he got through many, many years as mayor of this community.
Yeah,
And there are other mayors which all became close.
see, Jim Fitzpatrick.
Jim is there, oh
Yeah.
my goodness. So where were you, let's go back to close to the end. In the 1960s, the mid-1960s, you were
I was in Elmira,
already
raising
out of
children,
here,
yeah.
already
yeah.
with a family.
Yeah.
In Elmira, and your dad was going to hang on as long as he could.
Well, Bonnie and I, neither one of us were in the hotel business or particularly wanted to be. My dad had, aside from the Treadway connection with his friend Frank Birdsell, he had some people look at the hotel, the infrastructure, Dave Glenn for one,
Yes.
and the hotel did not have air conditioning. Remember, the original part of the building was built in 1868. It was heated by steam radiators. They'd put a new heating plant in the early 30s. But aside from that, you know, the pipes were old, electricity was old.
Didn't have air conditioning. See,
No.
that's almost ludicrous by today's standards.
I know.
But then I remember driving down the road when motels first got famous, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, television in every room.
Yeah, well,
Air-
Daddy put television in the
air
rooms in the 50s,
conditioning.
but not air
But I've
conditioning.
stayed in many hotel and motel rooms with no television sets and no air conditioning in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, in order to make it a viable place, to compete with the Holiday Inns and the Howard Johnsons that were springing up with their own little restaurants right practically on site, he was going to have to do something. And I think he discussed it with Dave, and I guess they figured out what it was going to cost. And Daddy said, I won't live long enough to recoup my...
I remember his
Costs.
comments were saying, I'm getting older.
Yeah, I'm getting older.
I'm not old, but I'm getting older.
I'm getting older, yeah.
But after 1968,
Yeah.
and after the demolition, did you
Yeah.
come back for that?
No,
That
No.
must have been so painful for him.
I think it must have been.
How could it not be?
Yeah, I think it
This
must
is
have
your
been.
life's blood,
Yeah,
and then it was gone.
and then it was gone. But he worked for Frank for a couple of years down in Rochester at the Treadway as vice president of the Treadway outfit.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, after that, and then he worked in Atlanta for the Downtowner Corporation. I think he was there a year or two. And then came back up here, and of course, the camp that they had built on Old Dock Road became their home. And Grandma had insisted they put a furnace in the basement, and that they had a basement with a furnace in it, in case you ever want to retire there.
Isn't that amazing?
So, and they did. So, and then Daddy did some consult work for the Queensberry down in Glens Falls for a while. I mean, he would, you know, per diem stuff.
What year did he die?
93?
Yeah,
93.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
Well, you got good genes, Sue.
let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Who knows about this wonderful book called Welcome to the Witherill outside this area? Anybody?
Well, people in Elmira do.
Did they do a nice write-up about you in the paper? Did the local television station interview?
No,
Like
no.
we're doing on
No.
hometown cable?
No, they haven't, but I should get a hold of somebody down there, right?
Well, yeah, before the book becomes an antique. I mean, you know.
I am speaking to a senior citizen group down there next Tuesday. And, you know, a lot of the people that are there remember the era of the old, you know, single owner hotel as opposed to chains and
It's a huge
franchises.
part of our nation's
Yeah,
history.
It is. It is, really.
And like I said, it's part of the fabric of downtown Plattsburgh.
Yep.
Those hotels that were here.
Well, and
from
all the
very-
stores that were there and so on and so forth. And, you
Well-
know, and the staff, people that worked for the hotel that, you know, were part of our family.
You know, that's something else I haven't mentioned, but at times there were over 3 or 4 dozen employees at the,
Usually about 35 to 40.
3 or 4 dozen, 3
Yeah.
dozen.
Yep, you're
I
right on.
remembered here seeing 40 people at times.
Yeah, and they stayed, you know, for the most part.
They did at the other hotels too.
Yeah.
I mean, people like your father and grandfather were not stupid people. They knew when they got a good cook in the kitchen.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
people
Howard
came-
LaPointe, for
Oh,
example.
my goodness.
You
yes.
remember Howard?
Oh, of course.
Well, when I decided to do this book and came up here to, you know, do some research, I was driving down South Catherine Street and I said, by gosh, I ought to stop and see Howard and Gloria. So I did. I just stopped. And this was, let's see, October of 2014. And I rang the doorbell, and Gloria came to the door, and she didn't know me at first. And I said, "It's Sue Howell." Oh, my God. She was glad to see me, and I was glad to see her. And I said, "I stopped to see you and Howard." And she said, "Well," she said, "he broke his femur, and he's in rehab at Meadowbrook." And I just had my eyes dilated and examined, and I can't drive you up there. I usually go up and see him every day. I said, "My car's right out at the curb. Get your jacket, let's go." So the two of us popped in on him, and I must have been there for, I don't know, an hour and a half to 2 hours, and he was glad to see me. I was glad to see him, and we reminisced, and he told some stories. He said, "You cannot put these in the book." So I won't. I
would
didn't.
imagine there are a few stories.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't say you couldn't talk about them on TV.
We all know things that are sworn to
Yeah,
secrecy
yeah.
about, but something.
He came to the hotel right after getting out of the Marine
He was
Corps.
there for a long
Well,
time.
until the hotel closed.
Yeah.
Before, you know, then he went up to the college and worked for a number of years after that. But he was part of the family.
Of
And
course.
when he came there, my sister Bonnie was only 4 years old, and Bonnie fell in love with him. And this is before he was married. And when he had his wedding reception at the hotel, he and Gloria, Bonnie, I think at that point, was 10 and still in love with Howard, and was very annoyed that he had gotten married to some other woman. So I guess he wanted Bonnie to come out, because she was hanging around in the kitchen or something, wanted her to come out and meet his new bride. And Bonnie wouldn't do it, because she was so annoyed that he'd gone and gotten married.
Does she remember that now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course.
Of course, she said it makes her feel like a damn fool, but...
I love it. You know, something else. When I first came here, and that's long after other things were happening in the community, I could see the handwriting on the wall because the downtowns were being fractured. They were building, you know, I can remember the campaign that we did on the radio called Go West, where things were all of a sudden going west. And then there was Plattsburgh Plaza, and there was Skyway Shopping Center,
Yeah,
and there
yeah.
were, you know, things were
Don't you
moving.
wish you'd own land on Route 3?
Oh, can you imagine? Well, the people were on Route 9 North
Yeah.
thought the expansion was going to go in that direction.
Yeah.
And there was a very simple thing called the mud flats, which didn't work too well in that direction. But what I wanted to mention to you was, in the 50s, and even in the early 60s, downtown Plattsburgh was a moving, grooving place.
It was,
And on
indeed.
the weekends, people came from everywhere.
Well, Montreal and, you know,
The shop.
over
and-
from Burlington and all over.
And that stores had sidewalk sales, and there were just, and I hated to see it go.
Well, it's happened in Elmira. It's happened in many, many towns.
Sure.
Not all because of the superhighways. Certainly, we had a big bad flood in 1972,
Yes.
and that totally ruined our downtown. And I don't think it's ever going to come back. And we have a big mall also, and Consumer Square and all that same kind of stuff you folks do up here. But the small town is no more. Really isn't.
So the only way we can relive those old days is the way we're doing it today.
Yeah, and
By
this is
telling,
fun. This
by
is
telling stories and enjoying reminiscing about what it was.
Yeah,
Because young people, our kids and our grandchildren, and in our case, lots of great-grandchildren, have no clue unless they sit down and ask.
yeah,
And fortunately, now they do, because teachers are smart enough to say, go and talk to your grandparents and write me a little essay about what life was like 50 years ago.
yeah.
And to think how many changes you and I have seen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The world is spinning way too fast for us. Maybe we should go back to the Witherill days from time to time.
Wouldn't that be fun?
I wonder, I don't know, this might be in the book and I didn't see it. Were there any movies ever shot, any movie stars that stayed there and shot any footage?
Yeah,
around the Witherill?
there are some movie stars, but most of the names are way before my time, and I'm not familiar with them. There were some people that stayed there, and I think I've got their names
They
in the
made a
book.
number of silent movies and a couple of talkies in this area.
Yeah, well, I know they did some stuff up in Lake Placid, because I know Barrymore was up there, and that was, the story of how
Young people are watching this and they have no idea who John Barrymore was, or Ethel, or any of those
or
people.
Lionel, or any of those guys.
Or the Marx Brothers. Calvin and I should have been born in a different era because we're both kind of fixed on time periods that were way before we
Well, I
were.
kind of enjoy that, too. I think
Yeah.
it's much more enjoyable than some of the stuff that's going on today.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Marx Brothers, you brought this up, but Zeppo Marx was the guy that imported the first Afghan hounds, the breed that
I did not know that.
yeah.
Little
trivia.
Little known trivia. I
Yeah,
love it. No
in
kidding.
1926, yeah, he imported the first two Afghan hounds from England, and grown like Topsy since then.
I have a great granddaughter whose name is Lydia. And so when I first saw her when she was a tiny girl, I started singing Lydia, oh Lydia, from the movie, and her parents had no clue what I was So I said, oh God, I'm old. This is bad. So what else would you like to say about this book? What is there anything in here that we haven't talked about that you think would draw people to come
Well,
and
yeah,
buy a
the
copy of it?
scandal. The scandal.
I'm ready for scandal.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Warren Harding, our 29th president.
Yes.
Presidents do scandals. Some of them get reported and some of them don't.
Yeah.
Anyway, he stayed at the Witherill. My sister has the register with his name
Really?
and framed on her dining room wall, and his paramour, whose name was Nan Britton, who wrote a book called The President's Daughter,
Yes.
and Nan registered as E.N. Christian. Anyway, they stayed at the hotel, and this was when he was still senator from Ohio, before he became president. And anyway, the conception, I don't think, happened at the hotel, but some other hotel. But they stayed there anyway. But in 2015, the New York Times had an article last August that DNA had definitely proved that Warren Harding was the father of Elizabeth Christian. So there.
So there. I love it.
And for many years, Harding's family had said he couldn't possibly have sired a child. He'd had mumps as a youngster, and so therefore that had made him sterile.
I've got photographs
But that's a lot of baloney.
of myself as a little kid standing in my crib with, those cartoon characters with the thing wrapped around the tie. That I had mumps on both sides.
And you have children and grandchildren and
37,
great, so it didn't, yeah.
37 great-grandchildren.
37?
37, that's all. I married a gal with 11 kids, so. you
Oh,
see.
well, okay. Okay.
But in any case, this is wonderful.
Thank you.
Will there be a sequel?
I don't know.
'Cause
I think
I'm
I've
sure-
used most of the pictures. I think I have.
Are you still welcoming contact from people who have stories that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In other words, another addition to get rid of some of the typos that that I missed.
Oh, no, you found mistakes?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God. It
Doesn't
kills
that
me.
doesn't that drive you crazy?
My first book, this is my first book, on the back, they told where some of the stories are from, and they spelled Potsdam wrong. The publisher.
Oh, I spelled Plattsburgh wrong on the cover, so.
Oh, I know.
ugh,
You,
left out the S. And you look at it, and you look at it, and you look at it, and you say, that's fine.
I love it.
But anyway, there's some other ones inside. Not horrible ones, but, enough to annoy me.
But people have come back to you and
Yes.
said, yes, I know a story you don't know, like my story about Nat King Cole.
Yes, that's a
which
great
I'm sure
story.
you found interesting.
Oh,
yeah.
very much so.
Yeah.
There's a fellow that, and I can't remember his name, but was a bellhop here, and he graduated from Potsdam's Crane School of Music,
Wow.
clarinet major. Then he went on to Juilliard, and I think he got a master's and maybe a PhD in music, and he ended up as a college professor of music down in New Jersey. But his niece still lives in Plattsburgh, and she came to the talk that I gave last October and bought him a book and had me sign it
Oh, wonderful.
and
oh, wonderful.
and shipped it to him.
That's more,
And then I got a wonderful letter from
see
him.
that? That means a lot.
Yeah, and more stories and more names of staff, and I've added them in there. So if there is an update, I'm going to try and include some of the stories I've heard, and certainly in the staff list, names of people that, I tried to remember as many as I could, and my sister did, and asked people we knew, and, some of it just goes out of your head. But anyway, I've added a bunch of new names.
There are people who are watching this program who have already gone like this to their friend or partner in the room saying, you remember that time at the Fife and Drum? Do you remember 1947? So if you wanted to,
And my email's right on the back of the book.
oh, that's even better.
Yeah,
So it's very easy to get in touch.
very easy to get in touch with me.
There's Calvin showing a picture of it as we speak.
It's shh3@cornell.edu.
I love it. So do you
So,
go back to Cornell once in a while?
yeah, I gotta go up there next week. They're having a retirees luncheon, and I'm seeing some of the old scientists that I worked with and still keep in touch
I
with.
love the campus.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Here's another little-known story that you might not be familiar with. The Chapin brothers, Harry and Tom Chapin. Tom Chapin was a basketball star at SUNY Plattsburgh. He now writes children's music and has recorded for years and comes back to Plattsburgh once in a while. His brother Harry Chapin became a very famous, Harry Chapin, Cats in the Cradle and all the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
wonderful songs that came out during his childhood or during his adult years, and he was killed on the Long Island Expressway. But their very first recorded album with their brother was released at the little radio station where I worked here in town, and they asked me, would you play this record? And I did. And I mentioned that to you because they had a lot of folk songs on there, and one song I believe was called Blood Red, about Cornell and about how many students had committed suicide by
Jumping up, yeah,
jumping into
the
the
gorge,
gorge
yeah.
at Cornell over the
Now
years.
they have big fences,
Oh, I know they
big
do.
high fences.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
It is,
Everything
indeed.
is connected if
Yeah.
you want to search for those connections.
I know it.
So now that this book has made you worldwide famous,
Oh, yes.
what are you doing that you enjoy these days mostly?
Well, now I'm on the board of the Friends of the Elmira Civil War Prison Camp.
Oh, come on.
And we found a building that was on the prison camp, and it was taken down about 30 years ago. Some guy was using it as his garage,
Oh,
and they built him a new garage and took the building down and numbered all the boards and so on, and we're about to reconstruct it. And we have been given property by the city for $1 on the property of the old prison camp. So we have a lot of interest in that, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. Getting involved
Does
with various.
Melissa know that? Have you told the people here about that?
I don't
They're
think so.
so interested in the Civil War here. They've done a couple of books on people from Clinton County and the North
Yeah.
Country who were served in the Civil War.
Well, it was called Hellmyra. It was so bad. There were almost 3,000 fellows died
Oh, that's,
in that 1 year period of time. So it's pretty infamous. It was sort of Andersonville of the North. And it
but
was.
you've always loved the history.
I have, and I'm working with a great bunch of people that are on the board, and we're
You
having a
can
lot of
move
fun.
back here. We'd find a place for you right
Sure
here.
you would.
Right here in
Yeah.
this great old building.
Yeah,
Isn't it wonderful when you come back and see that the former buildings on the Plattsburgh Air Force
I'm
Base
so glad they're
are
being
being
used.
utilized, that we have a museum campus, which I take every opportunity in
Oh,
promoting.
yeah, I think it's wonderful, just
great.
wonderful.
Yeah, your hometown.
My hometown.
Sue, it's wonderful to meet you.
Nice to meet you
What
too,
a
Gordy.
great pleasure to come here and finally get the background on this book. Sue Howell Hamlin, who knows about the Witherill like nobody knows about the Witherill. I wonder if any famous songs were written at the Witherill Hotel.
I don't know, but I do know this, there was a fellow who stayed here that knew my great-grandmother, and his name was Virgil Miller. And he wrote a poem for my great-grandmother, who died in 1932. He was a cinematographer and the director of photography for about 157 films between 1917 and 1956.
Wow!
His credits include The Phantom of the Opera in 1924, Navajo in 1952, Danger, Love at Work, Mr. Moto Takes a Chance,
Oh, yes.
The Mummy's Curse,
Another
and a bunch of
famous-
Charlie Chan movies.
Oh, my goodness.
He worked for Universal Studios and then, and eventually most other studios. He was a graduate from and a professor of at Kansas State U, teaching physics and electrical engineering. And he became the first director and founder of the electrical department for Universal Studios.
There. So who knows what things were
Yep,
conjured up
and
in the rooms at the
that's
Witherill.
right. He stayed here for some time, for some weeks, and I guess it became a friend of my grandmother's, and wrote a poem for her, and it's in the book.
So you'll welcome comments.
Oh, sure.
On this program, on the book, on the Witherill.
Yep.
On history in the North Country, and maybe things will be dredged up that you didn't want to remember.
Well, probably.
Hopefully they'll be mostly good memories.
I hope so.
So a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to
Great
meet you,
see
too.
I wish you the best of everything. Are you going to stay for a week or two? You're going
No,
home?
I'm heading home tomorrow.
That's pathetic.
Aw,
Come back often.
I'll try to.
I love it. Thank you so much for watching this program. All of our listeners are so kind. Some of them actually tell us where to go. They tell us about ideas that they have about unforgettable characters in books and places. And we love to do this thing that we've done for such a long time on Hometown Cable. If you're interested in what we do, we need your support. If you can, please write a generous check or send cash to Hometown Cable in care of Calvin Castine, 1477 Ridge Road in Champlain. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.